Welcome, welcome. You listen to 360 Info. I'm your host, Antonio. What you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. And what you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. And what you know of yourself depends on what you've been told of yourself. Yes, we just coming out of Black History Month, and I hope it's been a good month for you. It seems like as the years go on and on, we tend to lose a little bit of our folks, but we need to jumpstart this thing. We need to keep this thing going because the times that we're in right now is very, very, very important. Got a great show for you today. Great show for you today. Part two of a two-part series with our good brother Manu Ampim that is coming to Cleveland March 16th. Get your tickets, give me a call, send me a message. However, send it by bird or whatever to get your tickets and let me know that you want to partake in this great lecture that is coming up. It's going to be at Dr. Whitaker School at 2450 Prospect, 2 o'clock. And also you get a chance to sample some of our West African cuisine. Ubuntu Catering. It's a new catering company that I'm gonna put out here in the local area here to give you guys a chance to experience West African food, because a lot of us call ourselves African Americans, but we haven't even tasted the food or even know how to prepare the food. So let's get grounded in our culture and know ourselves. Also, we want to let you guys know that you can volunteer and be a part of our Juneteenth coalition, our inner city Juneteenth coalition. We're working on the parade, the Black History Parade downtown, the real Juneteenth. And we ain't talking about the folks who just got on the bandwagon a little late and they want to do Juneteenth programs, downtown. But we talking about folks who's been stakeholders in the community for a long time, and we collaborating, and we're going to put on that Black History Parade at the end of the month, June 29th. So again, contact me if you're interested in being involved, being a part of it, participating, donating, getting your organization or group into our souvenir book, all of that. 216-323-6155. In the remote studio, we got our co-host, Brother Vince. What's going on?
Well, got to let you know about something that will be happening at Larchmere Arts on the 15th of March. A good friend of mine, Eris Vinaya Edie, is going to present How I Got Over. It is an exhibition of art. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. It will begin at 6 p.m. on the 15th of March. So just a couple of weeks from now, we're going to open up the doors of Larchmere Arts and we're going to kick off the season. So we're really excited about that. Also, I just want to send out a reminder to those of you who have not applied for the Transformative Art Fund yet. You will have until March 30th to get your applications in. So you'll need to go to Transformative Arts Fund at cleveland.gov. So you can go to clevelandohio.gov. Just go to Google, put in Transformative Art Fund. It will direct you to the webpage. You can get all the information that you need about the Transformative Art Fund. You're going to be eligible to receive grants ranging from $250,000 to $500,000. I just want to make sure that we don't sleep on this, folks. Do what you got to do. Put your proposal together, submit it, and let's see where things go. With that, I just want to open things up. We have a great guest for you all today. He was here a couple of weeks ago, and I guess Brother Antonio decided he was so nice we had to do it twice. So we have Professor Manu Ampim. He's going to be here on the 16th of March. So Antonio is going to give you all the details about that so you can plug in and find out who this brother is. He is steeped in history. And as a matter of fact, we got questions for you, Brother Manu, before we even start the show. Somebody asked me something, and I'm going to drop that on you as soon as we have an opportunity to do that. So without any further ado, I'm not going to belabor you with a long introduction. We'll just say that he has been at some of the most prestigious institutions of higher learning that you could be at, including Oxford. He's teaching in California right now, and he's going to be going to Kemet very soon. You'll want to take advantage of that. We're going to give you all the details on that before the show ends, I promise you. So with that, we present to you Professor Manu Ampim.
Good morning, brothers. Glad to be back with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you know you had to come back. You just couldn't leave us hanging like that, man. You know, all that information that you was dropping like that. You know, um, I'm reflecting, you know, and I get to thinking, about our conversation, and a lot of times questions, come up about our history, and we kind of discussed this whole thing about were the Egyptians black, and seemed like the system has went way out their way to try to lighten those folks up as much as possible. And when on the last conversation, you talked about you witnessing some of the locals there, the local Arabs actually defacing and carving out some of the reliefs, and and it's just disturbing when we really think about that, because it takes me back to Brother Aswa Kwesi. About 15, 20 years ago, I seen one of his films, and it actually physically showed the Arabs chipping away the hieroglyphs off the temple walls, my brother. And now you see right now we face with, some of the issues that are going on in the States with them deciding what Black history that they're going to teach, and maybe in some areas eliminating it totally altogether because of it making their offsprings feel uncomfortable. How much of a high alert should we be in this country about what's actually going on and taking place?
We should be very concerned. And what's been happening, as you point out, for decades is what I call the de-Africanization of ancient images. And this is not from opinion or hearsay or speculation. It's the primary or firsthand research that I've been doing now for 3.5 decades. I've been doing diligent work in the field at pyramid sites, temple sites, tomb sites, and ancient residential sites and museums. And I've looked at over 1 million artifacts to carefully study them, not simply as a scholar and a researcher and as a historian, but with the eye of an optometrist, because you have to look at it with tremendous detail to see what the modern, not ancient, but what the modern conspirators have and continue to do. And they have systematically stripped the paints from reliefs and statues. They've carefully reshaped facial features to make the nose thinner and less wide, to shorten the width of the lips, and engage in all-out fraud. And so I've been able to be out in the field to document this with photographs, video footage, and on-site observation of making notes to see that these people are absolutely bent on the misrepresentation of images, because it's all about the idea battle. And some people think they have a false idea that Africa's never contributed anything to the world, but yet we were front and center and at the apex of human achievement. So there are modern conspirators that are doing the dastardly work. So who are they? I've been writing about this since 1994. And you're right, Brother Ashraf Kwesi. I did see a video clip of him showing that in the field, and it continues. But what we should be concerned about is this is an ongoing effort by so-called conservationists, so-called restorers, so-called archaeologists, so-called Egyptologists, so-called museum directors and officials. And these are people that have, in modern times, in fact, the Egyptians Antiquities Service in the 1880s, they were the pioneers of this absolute fraud. So when I take people to Kemet, it's not just a general tour, but it's a specific tour to look at not only the African high achievement in writing and medicine and solar calendar and architecture and social organization and the high status of women and so forth, but it's also to document the shocking, very obvious and undeniable de-Africanization, where you can see what I call the dark legs, colorless face phenomena. In other words, the conspirators, when they're stripping the paint, it gives the appearance that the white limestone in which the image is carved on, it gives the impression that the white limestone somehow represents the skin color. It does not. The skin color is always painted by the ancient African painters and sculptors and artists. But when the paints are stripped by modern conspirators, they don't bother with the lower legs because most people never pay attention to that. They only look at the upper body and the face. And the reason why I know that is that not only am I studying the artifacts, I study the people who are looking at the artifacts. And this is not just from the past. When I was doing field work in fall and winter of 2022, the conspirators were at it again. So what the modern Egyptian so-called conservation workers did was they completed the avenue of the Sphinxes that linked the Karnak and Luxor temples. It's about a mile and a half long, spectacular avenue where the Opet Festival, one of the greatest festivals in classical Kemet, was performed every year. And along that avenue of Sphinxes, you have some of the most outrageous and stunning fraud. So documentation beats conversation. So anybody that wants to see the clear evidence, or even has some position saying it can't be so, people are more honest than that. The heck if they are, simply go to my Facebook page. Just go to Manu Ampim, and you scroll down and you start looking at the end of 2022, and it is shocking how these people have recarved and reshaped noses. And it's amazing how they only attack certain facial features. And one thing about it is that limestone and granite doesn't just fall apart. It doesn't just chip away. It doesn't work that way. But what people have done is taken their chisels, taken their tools, and then take their white Portland cement and water. And then what they do is that after they shave and carve and remake an image, it's a dramatic makeover, racial makeover that takes place. Then they use the white Portland cement and their water, and then they can put in a patch, which doesn't even match the original paint, but they put in a patch in order to give the appearance of whiteness. This is absurd. The hundreds of thousands of hours that have taken place to engage in the fraudulent and ongoing de-Africanization. And I challenge anybody in the world to say it ain't so, because the evidence is obvious. And I've been writing about it and presenting about it and documenting about it since the early 90s.
Wow. You know what? It's amazing. See, some would say, we reaching. We just, talking just to make ourselves feel better. The question, Professor, why? Why so much attention? Why so much effort is being made to I guess, misinform the people? Because I know Egypt is, probably the number one tourist place on the planet. Okay. Why so much attention? Why I guess a person can say the same thing as here in America. Why they went through so great lengths to cover up our accomplishments, our achievements. I mean, what's this emphatic situation about? And what's drawing us so much towards Egypt? Why we have to make Egypt white?
Yeah, well, it's always a great question. It just shows the pathology that's involved. There's the pathological effort to systematically attack images that represent African high culture and unique contributions to humanity. It's a deep pathological obsession where people will jump up and down and they get excited anytime that we reclaim the contributions of our ancestors. I mean, these people even jump up and down and go crazy over a movie and make it seem like a war has taken place, but they have no issue when they always have light skin and white skin actors masquerading as if they somehow represented the ancient Africans in the Nile Valley. The people who are in Egypt now, let's be very clear, they're latecomers, they're newcomers. They came literally over 1,000 years after Kemet was already in decline and had mainly disappeared. So Africans had built a mighty Nile Valley civilization going back many millennia. And then Kemet is the greatest expression of this extensive Nile Valley civilization from Kush, and then Nubia, and then Kemet. And Kemet was at the apex of human achievement for quite some time, and 30 dynasties go by. And after the 30 dynasties, 1,000 years after that, the modern day occupiers in Egypt are masquerading as somehow they had something to do with the ancient past, and there's absolutely no connection. The modern Arabs in Egypt, they come from Saudi Arabia, they come from Yemen, they come from many other places, but they don't have any genetic or ancestral heritage at all. It's completely, it's not only fraud and a pathological attack on anything African, but it's also delusions of grandeur. This is just delusional, that people will go in and systematically not only attack and destroy images, but create fake modern docudramas. And then everybody in the docudrama they've all lost their melanin. And you would think that these people that are the actors are somehow representative of the ancient contributions, and they're not. This is why I've been on the case for decades to show definitive evidence of not only the African high culture and contributions to humanity that have been unparalleled, but also to indicate the modern conspirators who work diligently, who work overtime to destroy and alter these images. And a lot of people will ask, and they see, hey, Professor, why are the noses knocked off so often? Yes, that's a good observation. But what's more common than that is the reshaping and the remolding of noses that people don't necessarily see, because you're not going to see it from a photograph or a quick video clip that just kind of zooms in and moves on. You have to be out in the field and look at this evidence, as I mentioned, with the eye of an optometrist. And then you always see the telltale signs of modern fraud. It is pathological. And I've confronted people in the field. In fact, it was so blatant in 2022, I had never seen this before. At the Ramses III temple, the regular visitors and visitors became spectators. They were looking at people literally banging away at the wall. And usually people walk by, they don't pay it any attention, because it never occurs that a criminal, because it is a criminal act of defacement, that a criminal would literally be banging out images and destroying inscriptions in broad daylight in front of the public. So most people, it never occurs to them that this is a modern public documentable crime that's taken place. And that's what happens. And that's what's happening in all of those areas. And if you look at the tomb evidence, temple evidence, if you look at all of the artifacts in museums, it is a systematic pattern of pathology. And I've documented it throughout collections in Europe. When I lived in Europe in 1989 and 90, I went to all the major museums, institutes, and libraries that had stolen African artifacts. And I had no idea that I would come across this kind of pathological pattern. And people have an idea about it, but unless you're in the field to look at it in intimate details, then you'll never know the length to which these people want to engage in, as I said, the delusions of grandeur, to take African contributions and try to claim it as their own. And when Black people reclaim our cultural heritage, then people want to rise up and have a change.org petition over a movie. They have no problem with the regular movies and the regular phony and fake docudramas masquerading as if it's some actual evidence. And now the other thing, I'll end by saying this, now the other level is that now is more and more pressure for those of us who go to Kemet and take educational groups. Now they want to know, why does the professor want to have a meeting room in his hotel? What is he going to be talking about? We don't want him coming and bringing racial issues. So the guy said, wait, excuse me. He's a professor. This is his work, his field work, as he's at archaeological sites. This is his work as a historian. So he talks about his research and what the group went and experienced today, and to prepare for the next day. Oh, we're concerned about this. Let me tell you something. Go tell them that no one's going to stop me from saying what I have to say, and they can't refute the evidence. I said, that's number one. Number two, tell them to come to my evening presentations. And I said, I want all of them there, and I want them there the entire time. And not only that, I want them to stay right there and challenge anything that I present. And that's it. I want them to deal with it right there rather than go off, misrepresent what was said, distort what was presented, and then go and tell the supervisor, who goes tell the director, and then it gets back to me that there's a problem. But now they want to make sure that people cannot speak even in the hotel. So okay, let's be clear about something. As my late mother would say, let's establish some ground rules. Not only am I going to speak to my group without hesitation or reservation, but I'm also going to do it out in the field and let somebody say it ain't so. I love to be out in the field because guess what? Documentation beats conversation. And guess what? Right there on that wall is the evidence. Now, if somebody doesn't like it, come on and let's deal with it in the field. But that's what's happening now. There's another level of tension about why we're even bringing people to the African Holy Land now.
It's amazing. So are we talking in this vein of superiority complex or something? Are we there? And it makes me think about. I believe it was good brothers like Asa Hilliard and the like. They talk about the Aswan Dam, and they talked about it being flooded, and so much documented information is underwater. It's underwater, and then you have I might be saying his name wrong, Wahas, well, the guy Hawass, yeah, and he just went through his little tour in the country here, trying to refute, and I was talking at the side of his neck about the Egyptians and possibly not being black and all those things. What's your take on that? And I have to go back and reflect back to some of the things our ancestors talked about, and some prophetic writings that talk about it as well, about a lot of the truths that are going to be that they're discovering and that's coming to light, during these days. So if you could speak on that as well, on maybe where are we going and some of the things or some of the new finds that you might see that's on the horizon.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Well, Zahir Hawass, his background is interesting to say the least. Hawass is on every docudrama out there, even when he's not the one involved with the research. He wants to publish everybody. He wants to publicize everybody else's research and make the announcement to the media, and that's where the distortions take place. If anybody looks at Hawass's pattern, if a group of legitimate archaeologists are involved with an excavation, he shut them down where they can't even make a statement to the media without him punishing them and threatening to take away their permit. And not only that, but then when he comes, he wants to make the announcement. And check his pattern out. It's always something extraordinary. Oh, this may be the wife and the mother of King Tutankhamun. There's no evidence of that. He's just making it up. Well, this must be the so-called mummy of Hatshepsut. No evidence of that. It's just completely concocted and made up because he's had some of his academic training in LA, so he's got a Hollywood flavor to him. This is the Indiana Jones guy that we're talking about. He engages in the fraudulent presentation of evidence. The researchers don't make these claims. He does, and it's always somebody famous. It must be the tomb of Imhotep. It's something that's going to capture the interest because people have heard of these names. But what about the evidence? No evidence. In fact, this so-called tomb that was found in the Valley of the Kings, allegedly, Hawass said it was, some royal family. It's the family, it's the wife, it's the mother of King Tutankhamun, and there was no evidence that not only was it not a royal tomb, but not a tomb at all. And the researchers from the University of Memphis never claimed it to be a tomb. In fact, it was just a storage facility, a storage room. Nothing more than that. There's no evidence of a burial, but Hawass comes in to misrepresent. So his whole goal is to separate Africans from Kemet. He's been saying that for years, even when he had his office in Giza near the greatest statue on earth. The man had a office next to Haru Immaket, or the so-called Great Sphinx, and then can somehow fix his mouth to say that Africans had nothing to do and were nowhere near Kemet, really? And that, so when pressed, well, what ethnic group, what race were the ancient Egyptians? There's no race, it's just Egyptians, huh? So they have no connection, no foundation, no ancestors, no beginning. They just pop up as Egyptians. So then that allows him to claim some fake ancestry. But people have to be very careful about Hawass because he's been very good at misrepresenting the history and shutting down anybody that disagrees. And by the way, with the Egyptian Revolution in 2011, or they called it the Arab Spring, I think some of you may remember that. Guess what? The archaeology students, they were upset, and they marched down to Hawass's office to complain and protest that he was in the forefront of selling them a bill of goods, that they had these degrees and training but no jobs. So what did they do? They ousted him. Eventually, they ousted him from his office as his position as the head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities. So you didn't hear from him for a while. But now, maybe the last maybe about 3 years, he's made a reemergence.
Yeah.
He's had a reemergence, and now he's misrepresenting at another level now. And if somebody, if they go to my website, advancingtheresearch.org, I have some of these essays on Hawass fraudulently misrepresenting the history. And we mention him simply because of his global influence, because this man has single-handedly stepped outside the Supreme Council of Antiquities and himself determined whether or not somebody would get a permit, and then to pull a permit if they don't follow his dictates. Like if somebody goes to the media and makes a discovery and announces it, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with it is he doesn't get the credit. And this has been his pattern for quite some time, and this is not unknown. The only thing is that archaeologists will speak among themselves, but they're not going to go public with it because guess what? He's back with direct influence, and he will pull a permit and stop people from going in the country just because they quote unquote crossed him. I mean, what is this about? It's not about history. It's not about science. It's about a man that's consumed with himself. And I can give many examples of him presenting a fraudulent history that's masquerading as something legitimate.
Yeah, this it's sad and it's urgent, and that's kind of like what I wanted to give out, to our listeners and the people for them to understand how urgent this is and how important this is, because we still have folks going around circle about the importance of history, or at least our history as a concern. And it seems like there's been a overt and a covert effort that's been going on for decades, to shield this information. And if you want to just keep it real, it's there, just like even biblically, to include a group of people into this, and to keep with that same dogma of this propaganda that of their superiority, our inferiority, and to keep things based in where they're at right now. So I guess that's where it's always so important. I know you talked about it, you saying something about your students and taking certain photos to document that history, and which is going to be important. And it's going to be important right here in America as well. But one thing I just want to touch on too about as Black folks tend to look back at history and look back at Africa, and we tend to get lost in the sauce, or people get to talking about, I don't know where I'm from, I don't know what tribe that I'm from, or they talk a lot about all the languages that you see and have in Africa, and the different traditions and different versions of spirituality and things like that. And so they like, well, hey, they tend to throw their hands up, and maybe our Christian brothers and sisters look at that and see they all over the place. They really didn't know God, and they had this and they worship that and they did this, that, and other. The point I'm making is that when you see a book like Brother Shakanta Job that talks about the cultural unity of the continent, and understanding and knowing that there is a common thread before, they like sliced and diced Africa the way they did. Could you speak on it being most of the countries being relative, and there's some conscious way of thinking? You might have a different tradition, a different language or what have you, but they're kind of rooted in the same type of theory and theoretical consciousness and understanding of the planet and universe.
Yeah, and I just want to say I see all of you in the chat. So Hotep and what's up? Yeah, we have a lot of work to do. Yeah, we have a lot of work to do because there's a lot of fraudulent work or presentations that are being done. So our work is really to re-embrace African culture and tradition, and to do it well, and to be able to tell our story, because there's others that are very, very aggressive at misrepresenting history, and they use all kind of platforms in terms of doing that, including social media. I don't promote Wikipedia because there's problems with it. Anybody can post on Wikipedia, anybody can edit on Wikipedia, and there's no consistent standards. But the opponents use that to misrepresent. So we have to really look at even and really have a strategic plan to make sure that we get certain information out there, and not allow this unimpeded assault on the history. But for us, you're looking at the history has to be a foundation for us to move forward, because Africans they've worked out problems that we are dealing with today. They've worked them out. And so we can look at the traditions and the cultures, and we can look at what allowed Africans to be great and use those principles and practices in order to move forward. So this is why the memory and the knowledge of the past is important in the present, because it provides a foundation for the future. So it's not just going back to say that Africans were great in the old days. Yeah, but what does that do for us? What it does for us, it gives us the framework and foundation. And we have opponents that they live their entire life to undermine what's real, to undermine anything that would show the proper history and the proper order of where things were in antiquity. We got a lot of work to do. So we have to hold each other accountable, and also be consistent over a consistent period of time. Nobody has to ask me, hey, Professor, are you still doing your work? That's not a proper question. The question is, what are you working on? It's not a matter if you're still doing something or not. No, this is not my occupation. This is my vocation. It's what I do in life. And we need more people to be on the case and aid and support in whatever way they can, or participate. But that's kind of where we are. And so I know we have a community of people that are ready, that are hungry, but we have to challenge ourselves and see, what do we need to do in 2024 to move the work to the next level? What have we accomplished? What have we actually achieved? And that's what it's about. It's about achieving the accomplishments and contributions, not only of the past, but even the present. I'm sorry if I missed any aspect of your question.
I just wanted to bring home with that, and before I bring Brother Vincent to close out with the other part of the question about a common theme, a common theory about life, spirituality, that you in some of the travels and different cultural groups that you might have come across. Do you see a similarity on how they look at themselves, God, the world, and things like that? Because
100%, 100%, 100%, 100%. Yes, this is what I'm motivated by. As I do field research, not taking groups, I'm talking about actual field research in the Nile Valley and in the Omo Valley. 100%. I'm inspired. I'm motivated. I'm driven to be among those traditional people who still practice their traditional life ways. And what's amazing about the Omo Valley groups, for example, in like southern Ethiopia and northern Kenya, what's amazing about these groups, guess what? They don't care about anybody else. And because they don't care about what any other groups are doing, they maintain their authentic culture with little influence, because they don't care about anybody else. And so when I'm among them, and we've been able to gain some important inroads, It's the culture as it is, as they're not concerned about tourists and all that. Because when I go, guess what? Camera away, phone away. I'm going in as an authentic African who's returning home, and that's how they understand it. So they're open, and it's the rituals, it's the ceremonies, it's the traditional life ways that they are excited and proud about sharing. I've had meetings, for example, with a chief from the DZ group. There's over 40 different groups, for example, in the Nile Valley, indigenous groups, and almost all of them are practicing the traditional life ways in the village areas. And they have elders in place, chiefs in place, heroes in place. And it's amazing. And it's the ceremonies, it's the rituals that are still intact. And they have, it's amazing that as individualized as the group, as these groups are, there's still an overall commonality. There's a
Yes.
there's an overall unity of culture and spiritual ideas and beliefs. That's what's so amazing about it. So when Diop wrote his classic book some years ago, The Cultural Unity of Black Africa, I'm actually seeing that and experiencing that, and to talk to them about details. And it's amazing how open they are. So if I'm asking about the important rituals of marriage, birth or marriage, or some other kind of event, a passing of a great individual, and they wear the leopard skin outfit, who's wearing it? Only the most important people, a hero, someone who's a cultural protector and promoter of the group, or a chief, or somebody that is a respected elder when they dance and have the ceremony and the leopard skin outfit. So if you come in superficially, they give you a superficial answer. Hey, why do you use the leopard skin for the ritual? They will say, well, we like the coats, the spots on the coat. I say, yeah, well, the cheetah also has spots. So it cannot just be that, because your view of the leopard is extraordinary. And then they go deeper. And so the DZ chief recognized that I was not asking average questions. I was delving deep into the cultural traditions and rituals, which I had seen and heard among so many other groups. He gets up from where he was sitting. Next thing I know, it goes behind him to his compound. I'm looking to see what's happening because I didn't know why he got up. He comes out and he has his leopard skin outfit that he wears only in the most important rituals and ceremonies. And this man cannot be touched. He's a very high state. You can't go into his compound. You can't touch him. And so I'm learning about this. I said, wow, this is amazing, because he is giving me specific details and showing me the actual uh, skin that he wears, but his commentary, his explanation, his insight is the same that I'm hearing in other traditions in the entire region, and their high level connection to their culture, to their cultural traditions that link them back to ancient Kush, as they're part of the old Kushite empire from the past. But these are modern groups that speak a branch of the Cushitic language, and there's hardly anybody in the field to learn about these deep cultural ways for ceremony, ritual, and all of those things. So, yes, this is what's so exciting about it, is that the cultures are still intact, but it is a big but. Things are definitely changing. My colleague, for example, among the Morsi, I had him meet with my group that I took to Ethiopia last summer, and I know the situation. So I just asked him directly, and I asked him, "What is your view about the future of the Morsi?" And I'm sure I probably surprised him a little bit, but I wanted to get it out. He said that he doesn't think his group's going to survive that
Mm.
long into the future, and it's a sad story for him, But so that's what's happening right now. Things are changing as governments are putting pressure on these groups to modernize, to take their land and make them join the monetary economy and get a job at the sugar mill as opposed to the traditional hunting and farming. Those things are beginning to change. But when we win the trust of these groups, as we've been able to do over the years, you learn about the deep rooted traditions that are really phenomenal. and their connection to nature is second to none. How can they know that? How could they know? It's almost as if when they're explaining the leopard details, it's like how could they know? It's almost like they have them in a controlled area for systematic scientific study. This is how the details work. And now and they say that one by one group after another, and they're all independent. They don't care anything about the other group, so they're not hearing it from somebody else. But anyway, this is part of the extraordinary thing about the field work is you never know what you're going to learn. But the bottom line is we are dealing with people that are absolutely rooted to their cultural traditions, and their understanding of social harmony and cohesion is a model that we certainly can learn from.
Absolutely. My good brother Vince, what's that? I know
I just wanted to take this opportunity to remind folks that you're listening to 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490 WERE. Our guest is Professor Manu Ampim, and at the top of the show, there was some information that we needed to let you know, because we don't just have lightweights on 360 Info Network. Professor has taught in the Department of History at Morgan State University in Baltimore and at San Francisco State University in the Department of Ethnic Studies. He's also studied at Oxford University, and currently he's teaching at Contra Costa College in San Pablo, California, as well as teaching a 7-step primary research methodology course advancing the research. So we're really privileged and happy to have him with us today. We'd also like to ask you, as you are viewing us on YouTube and Facebook, please like and subscribe to our channels. It really does help us tremendously if you subscribe to our channels. You can view this broadcast on my YouTube channel. You can also view it on The Journey with Hamptonio on YouTube as well. And we'd like to thank Professor Ampim for sharing the link to Facebook, because at present we have 30 folks watching us on Facebook and 8 folks watching us on YouTube. So you're doing great work, even from the chair that you're sitting in, and we really appreciate that. The message is like, comment, and subscribe. Also, just to let you know that we can go into overtime. So when the terrestrial broadcast ends at noon, perhaps we'll be able to spend some more time with Professor Ampim, and also let you know about a great event that is coming up on the 16th of March. Professor Ampim is actually going to be coming here to Cleveland. We're really excited about this, and we look forward to doing great things with him in the future. And with that, I'd like to pose a question to you, Professor. Someone called me late at night the other night, and his issue was research that was being done about the boundaries of Al-Kebulan, or Africa, as it relates to the northeast quadrant of that area of the world. I know, and you can probably corroborate this, that the boundaries of Africa are greater than what we are aware of right now. And somewhere between 900 BCE and 900 AD, there was this idea that that part of the world is actually the Middle East. But I'm of the opinion, and I'm not a historian as you are, but I'm of the opinion that the people who lived in that area of the world that we call Israel and Syria and Jordan and Lebanon, they looked a little bit different than the folks that are there now. And right now we're engaged in this war. So I just want to get an idea from you, who was living in that part of the world at that time between 900 BCE and 900 AD, and how did it actually become what we call the Middle East right now?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I want to, give another nod and shout out to those of you in the chat. We're holding it down, and well, the term Middle East and this concept was created after World War II. So this is the 1940s. World War II ended in 1945. So it was the U.S. and Britain. It was the West that created this region, the middle of what? But that's what they did. They created the so-called Middle East. So apparently it's between Africa and the Far East. So the whole concept is new, to say the least. And But in that area north of, let's say, Kemet and the Sinai, where you have Lebanon and Palestine and that area, um, it really depends on the area specifically, and because politically you have different groups that are controlling, and then not so much controlling the area, but you have clearly Africans in the area, but you also have people that we would consider to be of in the latter part of that time period that you mentioned, of Arab descent. But there certainly weren't Europeans there. There certainly weren't any so-called Jews there who are claiming that this is some ancient homeland that God gave them. Really, so it really shows a lot of this going on. But we do know that there's an African influence long before that, African influence and an African presence in that region. And so that didn't go away. Now, there others might have migrated in, and they did. So the demographics may have changed, and they did, but it still doesn't uproot the original African population that was in the area. It was originally African because when people were born in Africa, the Homo sapiens sapiens, that is, those that are anatomically human, this is the migration route right out of the northeast African area into Europe and into the so-called, what's now called, the Middle East. So it had always been Africans there, and in some cases they politically were in control and in charge. But there's also other groups that migrated through that area from the east. So you have a mixing and mingling, but there's an African root and foundation that's clearly there before there was the people who, what we call, who differentiated, because we have to go back even before this, the 900 or so. But those that differentiated or so-called mutated before that physical change took place, you have an African population there for sure. But then you have it's a mixing and mingling that did take place, that's for sure, as well. So you do have different groups in the region, and then we have the emergence, as I said a little bit earlier, of the Arabs who started to migrate and establish some control in the area. But so that's kind of how we have to look at it. But it is different areas, there's different countries now, but there's different regional areas of control. So we have to really look at it in even more micro details. But as I said, there's a mixing, mingling, but there's an African foundation before that time period, and we have to look at that if we're going to have full view. But the idea of the so-called before the Middle East, it was called the Near East, and that would include Turkey, for example, and from Turkey. So we're talking around the Mediterranean, Turkey, and then further to the east. So it was the so-called Near East before it was called the Middle East.
Okay. So the folks who are running the country of Israel right now, and then the folks who are identified as Palestinians, I'm just curious about what real relationship they have to that area of the world that they are claiming right now.
Yeah, the place was called Palestine for quite some time, and it had been known as Palestine. And so if we look at the time period, let's say in the late 1800s, is Palestinians were there. There were some people who practiced the Jewish faith. And by the way, Jews is not some race. That's crazy. That's like saying somebody is from Puerto Rico and somehow Puerto Rican is a race. No, just like American is not a race. It's a geographical location where people reside, and they may have citizenship. So people misunderstand that Puerto Rico is a location, it's a country, it's not a race. American is not a race. There's different ethnic groups and different racial groups in America. And so there's many different ethnic and racial groups that practice Judaism or Christianity or Islam. It's not a racial category, but that's what's been peddled to the world. But the bottom line is that in the late 1800s, there were Palestinians, and the majority in that area of Palestine were Palestinians. There was a much smaller number of people practicing Judaism, including those of European descent practicing Judaism, and a small number of people who would have been Christians in the area. It wasn't a huge conflict until it was in the 1890s a effort to carve up the entire area with a Zionist plan. And so finally, this area that the British and the imperialists wanted to control and to move the European Jews into that area, even after World War II, right after the war, it still was considered universally across the world as Palestine. And the United Nations wanted to carve up, or as they called it, partition Palestine. No one called it Israel. There's no word Israel used. There's no country name. It was called universally Palestine. And so the British had controlled the area, and they wanted to settle, not resettle, but to settle European Jews to the area and to take over some of the Palestinian land. And so in the UN partition plan of 1947, you can see it. It is clearly and exclusively called Palestine for the Palestinians. And so once the state of Israel was created in 1948, that's what caused the conflict, where they claim to be the people of the book, and that this is their homeland. But you can say anything you want. You're not God. People are going to protect themselves and their homeland. So along with the help of the Americans and the British, and eventually they manipulated the UN to participate in this partition of Palestine. And then this is why the state of Israel was born in 1948. And they've been assaulting the Palestinian people for quite some time and taking their land, and no qualms about it. There are people that are older. There are Palestinians who are much older than the state of Israel itself that can take us. I've seen them do it, take people to where their home was taken from them, where their land was taken by Israeli settlers. But this idea that somehow this is the Israeli homeland and they can do what they want because this is their traditional land, based on what? Where's the evidence for that? There's a much older African population in the region. So by that logic, Africans have a claim to the land. So anyway, this I just wanted to share this because it's not that complicated if we really look at the longer view of the story. But even if we start in 1948, there's something wrong with the picture to wipe out people because there's a claim to the land. And by the way, Africans don't. The African views we're caretakers and custodians of the land, not owners. Just like, how can somebody own the air? How could that make any sense? How can somebody own the great mountains in the world? So they don't see land ownership in the way that these settlers have gone and taken the land and to kill off anybody that's in their way. Yes. In the name of God. The people themselves don't see it that way at all. So the Palestinians clearly have right to the land. They were the landowners, in the world saw it and called it Palestine. That's the reality.
Okay. I have another follow-up question I want to ask you, but we just have a few more minutes before our terrestrial part of this broadcast ends. So I'm going to save that question for the other side. But I just want to get to the heart of the Bible as an authentic historical document. You are a historian, and I'm sure that you look at timelines and you look at other books in comparison to that book, and that book, as you just stated, is used as a justification to claim that land. But the question in my mind, is it historically accurate to utter that pronouncement? We're going to answer that question on the other side, but we need to give folks details about your book. We also need to give them details about your appearance in Cleveland. So I'm going to toss the baton back to Antonio and let him give you the details on what's going to happen on March 16th, and also what folks can do to get that great book that you've done volume 2 of.
Yes,
Antonio?
Again, folks, again, the March 16th. All right here in Cleveland, get your tickets, 216-323-6155. If you're in Cleveland, it's going to be in Dr. Whitaker School, Wings Academy. We're going to talk about the school as well and getting your children enrolled into the school, Afrocentric school, which they need to learn and know about. That's 2450 Prospect, 2450 Prospect at approximately 2 o'clock. And there'll be a West African cuisine sampling as well to go along. We have the lecture first, and then we'll chop it up and meet and greet and hobnob with my good professor as we sampling some good West African food as well. Tickets are $15 in advance, 20 at the door, 216-323-6155. Professor, tell them how they can get your book.
Yeah, you can get my book, A History of African Civilizations, and it's available. It's persons can go exactly to advancingtheresearch.org, advancingtheresearch.org, and order a copy of A History of African Civilizations. It's the second revised edition, and it's $29, and what it is, it's a book for the public and the community, but it also is for those people who are teachers, because there's some lesson plans for anybody that wants to use it as a teaching tool as well. So it's a history of African civilizations, and it's a small part of what I teach at Contra Costa College. I actually teach a course on African civilizations, and so this is some of what I teach in the 16-week course, a history of African civilizations, and it's some of the primary research that I've been doing in the field now for more than 30 years. So do order a copy and share it with others. So that's what it's about. It's about one who learns teaches, and I've been out in the field learning for quite some time.
All right. So with that, just want to bring things home right now, because we are about to start our exclusive broadcast to Facebook and YouTube. And at this point, I'd like to ask everybody who's watching us on YouTube right now, please like and subscribe to our channel. We bring guests like Professor Ampim to you on a weekly basis, and we want you to take full advantage of the scholarship that comes through this channel, 360 Info Network. Also would like to remind you about the event that will take place at Larchmere Arts on the 15th. Eris Edie, she's a dynamic artist and poet, and she's going to be there in full effect. Also, just want to give a shout out to our engineer. We could not do this program without him. He is the glue that holds us together. So Tone Harley, my brother, we really appreciate you, and we appreciate your audience as always. Know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make today your best day. Peace.
Peace.
All right. We are live on Facebook and YouTube. Our guest is Professor Manu Ampim, and he's doing great things. Professor, I look at your work, and it's not really fair to compare you to Dr. Runoko Rashidi, because you both have accomplished great things within the span of your careers. But I just want to give you your flowers while you are here, because the work that you're doing is so important. We have to tell history as it really happened, and you go through the painstaking efforts to see what was there, to amplify what was there, and to show what's there, so there's no confusion about what's going on in this world and what we need to know. So I want to get back to that question about the historical accuracy of the Bible, because there are some people that their default is to that Bible as if it is the only historically accurate document in the history of the world, and everything revolves around it. But then there have been so many other books that have been written, and I'm just wondering how your research lines up with the accuracy of the timelines that are given us in the Bible, especially considering the fact that human beings have been on this planet for more than 6,600 years. So if our frame of reference is relegated to that narrow window, there's a whole lot that happened before that 6,600 years, and we need to know.
That's a great question. And again, shout out to those of you in the chat. I see you. I've been knowing many of you for quite some time, so I appreciate the support. That's a great question, because as a researcher, we have to assess the credibility of the source rather than just reading and figuring that that's automatically correct. So we have people that use the Bible and they're not critically thinking. First of all, the Bible has been edited for many, many centuries. There's been editors, there's been changes, there's the lost books of the Bible. They weren't lost, they were just taken out. I have all of that material. There's the Apocrypha, hidden material. There's people that were burned at the stake because they included some scrolls that other people didn't like. So we have to know that and be aware of all of the editing that is taking place in order to promote and push a certain perspective. And like the books of empathy are very important about Jesus's early life. And he wasn't looked at the way he's looked at today. But if we look at the Bible as a source, then we have to think critically about it. So if you just look at, I was telling, I think Miss Mina came up in one of the classes that I teach at African Civilizations. We're looking at human origins and how do we know about ancient Kush, the earliest and oldest of the classical African civilizations. And there's 4 categories of information on ancient Kush. It's not only the records from Kemet, it's the archaeological records, it's the Greek and Roman writers and their record, but also the Bible is a very good source on ancient Kush. It's the first civilization that's mentioned. So if we look at Noah, of Noah's Ark, and there's a great flood, and Noah put 2 of every kind of animal, male and female, on the ark. That could not have taken place. How are you going to get, you really think you're going to get giraffes and elephants and tigers and lions eternal enemy, the hyenas and the buffalo and the wildebeest and all of this and in an ark? No, this is not practical. And those are some big animals too. So no matter how big the ark was, that didn't take place. So we have to look at, well, what's the metaphor here? And so that's one thing. The other thing that's very interesting, though, if we're looking at the biblical record, is that we take a look at it, and there are researchers that have taken biblical stories and then they go to the archaeological, to the location to do archaeological research to see if it's correct or not. So there's like one publication is called Biblical Archaeology. And many times they take the story as it's written and then go to the area where the event's supposedly taking place in order to make an assessment. Is this correct or not? Is it likely or not? So there's biblical archaeology, and there's also another publication. Their whole focus is to look at the credibility of the biblical information. But when we look at all of this, so we just look at it as one of many sources. And sometimes the Bible gives very good information, is correct. Other times it doesn't make any historical sense. So if Jesus was hung on the cross was from the 6th to the 9th hour and there's darkness all over the world. Well, first of all, if that took place, then you have some of the greatest recording civilizations on record. The people in Kemet, they documented everything. Like, for example, if you take a look at the records and evidence from classical Kemet, so-called Egypt, they were so keen on documenting everything, including all of the phenomena. They have exquisite details on phenomena. This is why they created the first solar calendar in the world. And they had a ritual calendar based on star systems, all of that. And you see the small models when they are in the bakery or brewery, you might have in the model, you might have 2 workers, and then there's 3 or 4 scribes taking notes of all of the details. This is how careful they documented things. They didn't talk about darkness from the 6th to the 9th hour. And even the Mayans, who documented things in great details, they didn't talk about darkness from the 6th to the 9th hour. So instead of their darkness all over the world, what's more likely, it was probably a local cloud or something like that. So we just have to be reasonable and not just take it all literally. But sometimes it is useful. But like, for example, if Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Ham is said by the biblical theologians to be the progenitor, the ancestor of all people of African descent, Ham. And he has 4 sons. Sorry, ladies, they just left out all of the women. So Noah has the 3 sons, and then Ham, his sons are Cush. Cush is first, that's the oldest. And then they say Mizraim, or that's Egypt. And then they refer to Punt. The N is not always there, so it reads as Put. And then Canaan. That these are black nations. Nations come from the African ancestor of Ham. And if we go by the biblical record, and it makes sense. So Ham representing all people of African descent, basically. And then the same father, Noah, then he also has Japheth, that's supposed to represent all of those of European descent, and then Shem. Shem is the mixed groups, like Arabs, for example. It's hard for one father, one daddy, to have three different sons of racial. Let's say he had different wives or something, but it's strange, how this takes place. So because of all the different versions, we have to go back and figure out, well, when was this book edited or added or changed to try to make sense of the story. But as it comes to us, we certainly can get something from the biblical record, but it cannot be the only source of assessment. It is one of many sources that the critical person has to look at. As an investigator, we look at all evidence and not just take one and dismiss all of the other evidence. So I say it has some value, but we shouldn't go overboard with the biblical scripture.
Well, I think it's important to look at the fact that there were translations and there were also books that were left out. And there was also the agenda of those who shared that book with us. And one of the things that we know for a surety is that it was used to justify the enslavement of African people around the world. So, that's why the question is so relevant, because we kind of focus on that as the sole book that defines our existence, but you also talked about the difference between the literal and symbolic. I mean, I've thought about that all the time. Did two mosquitoes go aboard the ark? And then the animals that are naturally inclined to consume other animals, did they all of a sudden have a suspendence of their own natural proclivities? So, okay, well, we're on the ark. I can't eat that dog, or I can't eat that cat. Or what about the fish? You've got all those different types of fish. Did you get one of each kind of fish on the ark to exist in an unnatural environment? These are questions that a 7-year-old would ask, and sincerely want to get an answer to that. And what kind of answer do they get? Well, sit down, shut up, and accept what we're telling you. So
exactly. Those are excellent. I just wanted to say this briefly. Those are excellent points for sure, and because that's what I say. I want to talk to the third grader, because they're going to question you and challenge what's being said until you can be clear about it. So, so some of that is doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't, because of different. You're right. The agendas, the different versions, and all of that. And Nat Turner rose up and used it against the enslavers. He was Prophet Nat for a reason. He flipped the script on the opponent and went out and organized resistance to the slave system when they were using it to enslave Black folks. But we can look at the books of Acts 7:22. And the book of Acts 7:22 says that Moses, the lawgiver, Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And if that's so, if he came down from Mount Sinai with the 10 commandments, he had to go up there with them because they were already in existence.
Yes.
And he took 10. Those are good 10, but he only took 10 out of 42. And in my class, 10 out of 42, around 25% is an F. It's not good enough, because he took 10 from a much larger comprehensive system of 42 declarations of innocence. Mm-hmm. And so we can get some things from the biblical scripture, but you're absolutely 110% correct, Brother Vince. We have to look at the larger picture and what's the agenda that's being peddled and presented as people embrace the text. And some people may not like it, but there's a difference between evidence and ideology.
And that's the whole point. That's the whole point. And I think, like I said before, the system has done so good of a job in keeping us away from critical thinking. You could just say that, from critical thinking, because we, turn our backs towards everything that was going on over in Africa. So therefore, we have no reference point. We have nothing that we can compare things to. When you like in college, our college students, you do a comparison contrast paper. You look at both sides of the coin, and then you come up with a good analysis or a good theory or thesis or understanding of everything. But it's just simple. We just recently started really getting into the landscape of Africa, the political, the political landscape and things like that that's going on in Africa. But we can contribute a lot of our theologians and local pastors to to severing that relationship and having us turn a blind eye to what's going on over in Africa. So I'm simply saying is that if we were historical students of what was going on in Africa, we'll be able to easily follow the breadcrumbs and have some logic and put logic together and say, well, doggone, wait a minute, here's these 42 negative confessions, and here's these 10 commandments that this man saying that came off the mountain and given to us. And you see the resurrection story, the whole birth story, and going into the underworld, all these things that is biblically in the Bible that was there thousands or so years. A person would be able to put those two together and make some good sense of it, and saying somebody plagiarized, somebody lied, and things like that. And I always said linguistics was the key to uncovering a lot of these mysteries that was going on. Follow the language. The language will tell you exactly, okay, who was these people? What was their interpretation of what was going on? And then you could come to draw some type of conclusions. And you got to have historical data to go along with a lot of these stories or mythological stories. Does the data go along, the historical data go along with the information? And more often than not, Black folks take the information and run with it and not do any research. And that's why we applaud what you're doing, and guys like you, brother Ampim.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, in my book, A History of African Civilization, I don't just dive into the evidence and information. I provide the foundation. So the whole section, the first section, is about research methods and the importance and power of primary or first-hand research. So as a researcher, I'm not necessarily concerned with what you know, but how do you know? It raises the question of methods or how. And so I have a section to distinguish primary from secondhand information, and even contrasting primary from even tertiary information, because the further information gets from the original source, the more inaccurate it is. Yes. So I always tell people and even warn them that our mission today is to help prevent the spread of ignorance. It should be a law against the spread of ignorance. And I need more people to join our campaign. We've got many converts. It should be a black law against the spread of ignorance. And not only that, in addition to this, is that I've been on the campaign for a while to stop the spread of information viruses. We know about the coronavirus, we know about computer viruses, but we're not too clear that information viruses have gone viral. And we need to stop it right now and stop the spread of the misinformation. And so people just state anything. And not only well-meaning people who do that, but there's also propagandists who've been working for quite some time to mislead, misdirect, and misinform. So we have to be very, very careful about that. So my book gives some tools that people should always be aware of so that they can be armed as they read and digest and review material, not just take on something just because they agree with it. That's not the right approach. When I'm in a bookstore, I approach things very differently than 99% of the other people. Most people will buy a book because they agree with the title, or they might be familiar with the author. For me, that's not really the standard. I might be attracted because of the title, or maybe attracted to take a look at it because of the author, but I don't buy it for that reason, because guess what? I look at the back of the book to get an idea of what's inside the book. So I do a training on primary research methods and Africana studies. I mean, the primary research can be applied to any field, but I do training how primary research, how it relates to Africana studies. And one of the things that I point out to people is that there's some ideas out there that are not correct. I remember I heard for years and years that you cannot judge a book by its cover. Of course you can judge a book by its cover. Who said that you can't? As a scholar, that's my work, to be able to scan a huge amount of material, and you can judge a book by its cover. Number one, every book has a title, so that gives you an idea what it's about. Also, every book has an author. If you know a little bit about the author or find out about the author, that can give you some idea what it's about. When you turn the book, on the back, you can tell if it's professional or not, because the professional book's going to have a barcode. It's going to have the name of the publisher, and the name of the publisher is going to give you an idea of what the perspective is. For example, Black Classic Press and Brother Paul Coates is going to have a different perspective on the things that he's publishing versus Eisenbrand's Press. That's going to be pro-Israel, for example. So of course you can judge a book by its cover because you look at the publisher, and not only that, in addition to that, you will have a blurb about the book and the author. That's all on the back cover. You haven't even opened up the book. So when I look on the back, and if I see that the person's done some original work, some primary first-hand research to reach the conclusion, then I'm inclined to maybe purchase the book. But on the back of the book, if there's no information about the person, or just some quick statement that this is somebody that went to a couple of conferences and lectures and now has an opinion about, so I'm not inspired by that. That might be okay, but I'm not, as a scholar, I'm not interested in that to further what I might know or consider. But you can always judge a book by its cover. You can tell if it's professional or not, or what method a person used. So I train people in learning how to evaluate and assess and scan material so that you don't have to flip through all the pages to get an opinion. You know that long before. So there's many things that we can learn, but I would say the biggest thing is that we need more of you, and I see you online now, to join the campaign against the spread of ignorance and make sure we can halt and put a stop to the widespread information viruses that are out there.
Just quickly, Vance, let me do this real quick. One of our good brothers, our local scholars here, he wanted to drop this on you real quick. Have you heard of a book called The Skeptics Annotated Bible?
No, I haven't.
Okay. He wanted to know if you heard of that. Okay. All right, go ahead.
Right. Okay. Sentiment asked a question at 11:45 in the last hour, and I'm hoping that he is still with us, but I'm going to share this question with you and then give you an opportunity to address it. He's asking, the ancient Egyptians believed that the ancestors came from Ethiopia. How do you explain that?
Well, they didn't really say that directly. And Ethiopia, by the way, did not exist as a country. The name didn't even exist. The name was Kush, and Kush was a vast empire. I have a whole section on Kush because I coined the term Kushology, which is a study of ancient Kush and the modern legacy of groups that are part of the ancient Kushite empire. So they didn't say that directly, but you are correct, Brother Santos. This is my old classmate from Morgan State University in the 80s. Good to see you, brother. He's in South Africa. But they certainly had an orientation towards the South. They certainly looked at the southern area around the Ethiopia, but even more specifically around the Horn of Africa and Somalia as God's land or the Holy Land. They certainly saw that, they prioritized that. And there's no question that they had a southern orientation and that they came from and originated from the South. So the entire region to the south of ancient Egypt or Kemet is one united cultural complex, is one united ecological complex. So you see the flora and fauna and the cultural traditions around the flora and fauna that clearly indicates that this is one large cultural region where there's so much overlapping ideas and practices. There's an underlying unity, and there's no question. Like somebody asked me the other day, the connection between the kingdom of Tasseti, which was in Nubia. Tasseti was on the border between modern day Egypt and southern Sudan. Tasseti, and he asked me about the kingdom of Tasseti and the first district in Kemet, also called Tasseti. So yes, it shows that there's not much difference. There's not much distinction between Kemet that emerged and the ancestors of those in Kemet that came from the south and went down north, not up north, because in the south you have the mountains, and the Nile runs downhill from south to north, and the flow of culture and people also flowed from south to north. So there's definitely a link, and you're totally correct about that. That's what I'm in pursuit of as I do my field work, is the origins of Kush, of ancient Kush. So it's part of my work in the field of Kushology. So that takes me to not only just Egypt or Kemet, that's where I started, but I had to go south to Nubia. I recognized that wasn't enough, even though that was important. So I started doing field work in Sudan in 2007. I recognized that wasn't enough. So I've had to continue to go further and further south. So this summer, I'll continue to work in South Sudan and in the whole region, Kenya, Uganda. That's the area that you see the the foundations and origins of Kush, and I'm on the case to pinpoint the origins. But Chancellor Williams is correct, a great researcher. We can't really put a date on it because it goes so far back into the Stone Age, and it seems to be ready-made. The further we go back, we have high-level culture, so we don't see an evolutionary development. It seems to be there already. So that clearly, my brother, is part of the foundation of what later became Kemet, and we can see that. But they themselves did not mention Ethiopia because that name didn't exist. The current country didn't exist. They just called the region Kush. What does Kush mean? The answer is we don't know. There's no explanation of the meaning of it, but we know that these were Africans further to the south. And lastly, as I mentioned before, this whole area, people are speaking a Cushitic language. And in South Sudan, the people are excited. They're inspired by it because they have Kush Airlines and there's a Kush Bank. And, you know, so there's a lot of connections to Kush, but it's been many years since the foundation and the origin and the direct influence of Kush. So we have a lot to try to remember and reconstruct. And that's why working with my colleagues in South Sudan, we're getting to the bottom of not only ancient, but also modern Kush. But in general, you're right. There was a southern origin, but we want to be very specific and accurate as we share those origins.
You brought up Chancellor Williams, and I'm privy to a group of young African American scholars who reflect on his work. And one of the things that they have talked about in their conversations is how there was a difference between perhaps those who were in Kemet and those who were in Kush, with reference to their willingness to allow outsiders to come in and be a part of what they were doing. It seems as though those who were in what we're calling Kush right now were really more about maintaining the integrity of their blackness, whereas maybe some who were in Kemet were willing to allow others. And we saw what happened when the Greeks came in and gangstered the civilization. So I just a question about that. And I also want to ask you about a controversy surrounding the defacing of the Haramaket, the nose being blown off, and who was responsible for that and who may not have been responsible for that. But first, let's talk about, you know, the Kushites saying, hey, we pro-black, we're going to stay pro-black. And perhaps those in Kemet saying, well, you know, we'll let folks in, and then miscegenation occurs and civilizations get appropriated.
Wow, this is a deep question, and deeper than what people may know, actually, because when I read The Destruction of Black Civilization and it was written in the early 70s, around 71, and I started to use it as a tool and a guide back in 84, 85, 86, 87, and use it as a tool to do my pioneering field work, pioneering research work in Europe. I used Chancellor Williams' book as a guide. And one thing he said that really goes almost unnoticed is that he had mentioned a group, as he talks about the formation of ancient Kemet, you know, over 5,000 years ago, he mentions warfare, and that Africans went to war against the non-Africans. So he calls them Asiatics. And that goes unnoticed because people just say, well, Kemet was founded. You have the first dynasty, and then they will skip to the Greek period and when Europeans were there. But as I looked at Chancellor Williams's thesis in The Destruction of Black Civilization, and I had to prioritize his insight because he did field research in 26 countries and among 105 different language groups. He's a primary researcher. So I use this to see what extent is he accurate. And I was stunned that in one statement he makes after another, he's absolutely correct. So before the first dynasty is organized, guess what, folks? There are white folks. There's Europeans in Kemet battling, and they're in the north, and they have a fortified city. So those of you who know about this, I would say to you, go to the Narma palette, Narma, Narmer. Go to the Narma palette and take a very close look at not only the front side where Narma has on his crown from the south, but the back side where you have three registers and you have Narma, the largest figure, and he has his crown on in the north. And you show him beheading foreigners. You see him betrayed as a bull. I mean, what could be a better image for a ruler, a king, than a bull? So he's the bull that's knocking down fortified walls. And take a close look. If you can get a good image of it, I have it in my book, A History of African Civilizations. Take a close look at the people and their appearance, how they look. This is clearly a more European type. Look at the nose structure. This is not African. Take the nose structure on that backside and compare it to the officials of Narma, how they look, and look at the front side and all of the people. And these are two different racial groups. So I saw the Narma palette when I was in Cairo, but I also looked even more carefully. Now, there's something that you should know. There's different artifacts. Let me give you one that you can probably find online, or if you're in London listening, or in Paris, you can go and check it out. But there's something called there's an artifact called the Hunter's Palette. Hunters. There's two pieces, and the Hunter's Palette shows a wild group. I mean, they're wild, they're tattooed, and they look as wild as they come, and they're hunting. So they're called the Hunter's Palette. So when I saw this in the British Museum, I asked one of the Egyptologists, what is their view about the people on the Hunter's Palette? He said that their view is that they eventually became a part of the population in Kemet or Egypt. And I thought that was very interesting, but clearly these people have nothing, their appearance is completely different. So what we have is a group of people that had fortified cities. They caused conflict. They were not a part of the rulership structure, because you can see the cultural lifeways, but even more directly, look at the images of the Africoid founders and rulers of Kemet. But the Hunter's Palette is one of many artifacts that clearly indicate that these wild types were there before the first dynasty. They didn't contribute, because you don't see those images being portrayed in the rulership, the royal family, or any of the images, high officials, but you see them there. So for some reason, as you said, brother, you're totally correct. For some reason, the Africans in Kemet allowed them to be permanent foreigners. There are letters. Last thing I'll say, there's letters, for example, from a fort called Simna. In the Simna area, there's military dispatches from one fort to the next to indicate that they were moving this foreign population to that location where the other fort is for trade. Why they were allowing them to trade, why they allowed them to stay as permanent foreigners who are always depicted as separate from the indigenous people in Kemet. And this is something that's not commonly known. But they were always shown differently. They were always shown outside, but they never totally distinguished these people. They could have, but they didn't. And those people are there. So we're talking thousands of years before the foreigners called the Greeks came around, and they're permanent foreigners all the way through, always shown as foreigners and always shown in postures of humiliation, in postures of being subjected. So I will, in my book, Modern Fraud, I will share the total story on this. I don't make all of my arguments on social media, because people will steal and rip me off and claim that they came up with it. So I've shared some of this along the way, but that will be a more comprehensive presentation in my book, Modern Fraud. as I also expose these great forgeries in the Cairo Museum. But this permit foreigner group, people really should pay attention to it because they're always there. You just have to know that, and then you look for it in the artifact, and it's there. But you know what? If somebody's looking at hundreds of artifacts in one gallery and another 100 over here, it's hard to look at all of that. That's why I slow things down when I'm leading tours and show people specific images and items that are historically important, but they're not large. So you don't necessarily see the average person knowing anything about it or not even glancing at it. So anyway, that's a long response to your excellent point.
Okay. And then the other question was about the Haramaket, known to most as the Sphinx. Who do you think was responsible for defacing that great monument?
Okay, well let's address that. I'm glad you addressed it. When I'm leading groups in the field, we address it. So I know when I was an undergraduate at Morgan State University, I heard multiple scholars, lecturers say that it was Napoleon that blew the nose off the Sphinx, and no such thing. So when Napoleon got there in 1799, the nose and the beard were already missing. And so, for example, if you look at the drawings of Frederick Nordin, he draws in 1755. He went to Kemet to specifically document monuments such as the Great Harua Market. And this is before the days of cameras. So Nordin, you can see it online, folks. Nordin actually draws the nose and beard missing. And it's not only that source, but there's a number of sources that indicate that the nose and beard were missing. And this is probably, some think that it was some Muslim cleric that may go back to around the 8th century, or if I recall correctly, around the 8th century, 7th century, that may have went in and attacked those features of Harua Market. But it certainly had nothing to do with Napoleon. This is misinformation. By the way, it wasn't blown off anyway. That would have been a heck of a cannon shot. It was not blown off. This was chiseled off. And if anybody looks at not just drawings, which are very important, but photographs, it seems like every 20 years or so, the enclosure area where the great monument is, it just fills up with sand, small rocks and sand, because it's kind of in an enclosure that's been carved out. And this mighty monument, which is 66 feet high, 240 feet long, made out of one single block of limestone, it gets filled up. And you see photographs and drawings where literally the sand is up to the neck of this huge statue. And you see ridiculous people standing on, the shoulders or on the ears. You see it. You see that. So it's very easy for them to have climbed up the statue. And it's far more likely, far more reasonable that they carved the nose off because of disrespect, as opposed to a fantastic cannon shot. But we know that it had nothing to do with Napoleon, because these pieces were already missing half a century before he got there.
So are you saying that the reason that it was knocked off was because of disrespect and not necessarily because of what they're doing right now in terms of trying to redefine history, or say that these people weren't black? Maybe it was not about ethnicity, but it was perhaps religiously motivated.
I think the latter is correct. It's religiously motivated and just foul and destructive. And by the way, that's not odd, because we have some fanatics today that if they had their way, they would blow up pyramids and other monuments, and they've called for their followers to do that. So when the Arab Spring or the revolution took place in 2011, this was the great concern, that these clerics, these madmen, these extremists, that's what they wanted to do, go and attack and destroy monuments. And some were damaged and looted, but they wanted to take it to a level of blowing all of it up. So it's not odd or unusual for people who think that way to go after artifacts, which they have done. But that's probably and more likely, this is what the evidence leads us to to what happened to Harun Maka. And by the way, did we know that the nose and beard didn't fall off? We know that. So it was clearly deliberately done.
Yeah.
Right. It's very, very interesting. Uh, when you speak on things, that's why again history is so important. Professor, you speak on, and I kind of want to bring it around a little bit to us and what's going on right now. And and I always, I'm glad you brought up, and I go back to some of the questions that our people might want to know: why we need this information, why is it important? You spoke on something that you call Cushology, and dealing with spirituality and rites of passages and things like that. And I think when I have to take a look at us as people, and something Dr. Amos Wilson called this reactionary culture that we have found ourselves engraved in, something based on how the system has treated us. We come with a hodgepodge of things, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, to make it work for us. You know what I mean? At this point, based on how we've been treated and psychologically, demonified from where we're at right now. But I think culture, that 7-letter word, is so important to us coming up out of this stupor that we are, this ignorance that you were talking about right now, because it gives you the foundation of everything. And if we would know, based on other people's culture, which have stolen from ours, this whole rites of passage piece, or this initiation piece, and things that teach us how to live, and our purpose of a man, woman, child, community, and our responsibilities are missing so far, removed from us as a people. Again, if we was do this Sankofa and look back at those things, I think it would do so much for us as a people. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I agree, my brother. I think that this is part of what we need to do. We have to make it real and relevant, So what is this going to do for us? Well, it's about the idea battle. And we have to win the idea battle. And what people do every day when they wake up, and it's the ideas that they have. This is why we do what we do. So it's very important for us to learn the practices, principles, and apply them. But there's no way to move forward. When any group is in the quagmire or the position that they're in, like we are, people of African descent, there's only one of two things. Either we've never had a way and we lost our, either we never had a way, but we're always dependent on somebody else as second-class citizens, slaves, dependent on them for food, shelter, clothing, education, transportation, and healthcare. So nothing is going to be new now because it's always been that way. Or number two, we had a way and we lost our way. And clearly that's where we are. We've lost our way. So we can't try to catch up, as Frantz Fanon would say. We can't try to catch up with the decadence of Europe or the decadence of Euro-America. There's no solution in that. So we have to use our own traditional life ways and experiences to solve current problems. This is why this is so important for us, to take the things that allowed them to work those problems out in traditional and ancient African culture. This is the principles and practices that we can apply today. So this is where we are. We have to use the experience of the past. It's foolish. It's ignorant for people to think that we're going to solve problems or try to solve problems, just come up with creative ideas without looking at the foundation of how this has already been addressed and solved by Africans in the past and in indigenous cultures right now. So that's what we need to really look at. And by the way, in the chat there, brother, I think brother Terry. So yeah, Frederick Lewis Nordin. There's another image you can find. That's the front image. You also see a side image of Frederick Lewis Nordin, where the beard and the nose are missing. And by the way, lectures are okay, but be careful. What about the evidence? I've heard some of the most ridiculous lectures that have nothing to do with facts at all. And like for example, if I can say this, just to show you, I used to think that all of Africa, everywhere was hot. And just out of ignorance, I didn't know. I took my first geography of Africa class at Morgan State, and learned that I didn't know anything. I was just listening at other people, and learned that everywhere is not hot. It just depends on where you are. It's not super hot in South Africa. Check the weather out. And not only that, but in elevated areas, it's not hot. That's why in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, it's really it's a temperate climate. It's not hot. Doesn't usually get past, the upper 70s or something like that. So, and I also learned that so I had to correct that. I also had to correct what I thought was the Nile River being totally magical. Wow, how can a river flow from south to north? Well, because of gravity. That's why all the hills are in the south and the valleys in the north. So that's not the only river that flows from south to north. It's just, it's just basic little things that I needed to reconsider in order to begin to question and critique things as a critical thinker. And that's what I ask people to do is not just listen at a presentation, but let's go to the evidence so we can stop the spread of misinformation.
So your scholar in South Africa has a question for you. He says, with the current civil war taking place in Sudan between Africans and Arabs, is it a repeat of the destruction of Black civilization in the 21st century?
Good assessment. I would say yes. The Arabs, they are the gingerwheat, the so-called rapid support forces. No. They're gingerwheat. In Arabic, gingerwheat means devils on horseback. Devils on horseback. So the gingerwheat, they're genocidalists, they're murderers. So what makes the Sudan situation even worse, it's kind of hard to compare vicious genocide, but worse is not only the killing off of the indigenous African people, but enslaving them as well. So that on the western portion in Darfur in Sudan, the Masalit and other indigenous African groups are being literally, all the men are being killed by the devils on horseback. Then they rape the women so that the offspring will be from them. And they're being helped by the Wagner group in Russia and the United Arab Emirates. So all those women and all these folks that want to go to Dubai and buy all of this stuff, keep in mind that these are the very folks that are fueling the genocide in Sudan. These people that are not cultured, they don't know, I want to go to Dubai and do what exactly? Just to spin, because they see the high social media people, influencers going to Dubai. And these are people that are vicious. They're viciously anti-Africans. They're funding genocide so they can do what? Steal the gold. Steal oil, literally steal. So yes, it is modern destruction of Black civilization and Black people. My adopted family in Sudan, for example, more than 120 people have been displaced from the Khartoum and Omdurman area since the outbreak of the war in April 15th of 2023. More than 120 people displaced because the gingerwheat, they're genocidalists, and they literally want to uproot Africans from their traditional homeland of Sudan. So please keep an eye on that. We have to do something. We have the families scattered everywhere. It is not a good situation. But the gingerwheat, and by the way, Omar Bashir. And Bashir was the dictator for 30 years, and he was overturned and overthrown, Bashir, in 2019. Time flies, but it hasn't been good because it was a civilian uprising, but the military took that over. So the people are kind of lukewarm to support any of the groups, including the military and the gingerwheat, the devils on horseback, and Musa Halal and other killers who've been killing Africans in Darfur for a while. So it had not been an African-Arab conflict. It was Africans like Omar Bashir claiming to be Arab so that he can, as they did in some generations back, have high status. So you have people that are fundamentally African in every way. They're physically African, but the mentality is Arab. So because they speak Arabic, they practice Islam, but they make up a fake pedigree, a fake family lineage that's not even there. In order for what? Social status. So when I first went, I'm looking for the Arabs. I didn't see them. Then I recognized that a lot of the people say they're Arabs because they have an Arab mentality. It's the same thing that what Black folks would say somebody's a so-called Negro. They don't mean the race or ethnicity. They mean the mindset. That's been a problem in Sudan that's been growing. Now because of the disruption and chaos, now you do have a legitimate growing Arab population among the Jinjuit who are mixing with Africans. So you have Arabs and you have an Arab African mix that are in Western Sudan and the eastern part of Chad, causing havoc and looking to take over the entire region to steal the land and to make tons of money on not just owning the land, but the gold, which they're doing now with the Wagner Group in Russia, and to steal the oil and any other resource that's there. It's a problematic situation. It's very difficult.
Okay. We have this question from Joe Bailey. I just want to make sure that folks who have chimed in the chat get their questions answered. He's asking, please explain the timeline of when the people from the north moved south into Sumerian lands in North Africa in the time period of Narmer and before.
I think I missed that. The Sumerians. I'm sorry, brother Chris. Can you reread that?
It says, explain the timeline of when the people from the north moved south into Sumerian lands and North Africa in the time of Narmer and before.
Well, when we see the records, when we first start seeing the records, about 3,500 BCE, before Kemet is organized, there's different artwork, there's artifacts, there's different images, there's documents. So before Kemet is organized, if we go by the traditional timeline, which I'm not convinced that is accurate, but if we go by the timeline that Kemet was established around 31 or 3,200 BCE, which is speculation, but before that happens, at least at 3,500 or so BC, we see these foreigners that were there. We don't necessarily see them migrating in, but they're there. These people are already there. Africans from the south engage in warfare to subdue these people. But they don't, as I mentioned earlier, they don't extinguish all of them, and they don't seem to kick them all out because they're permanent foreigners, but they're there. We don't see migrations. But people have tried to make it that Sumer somehow, the Sumerians and their culture came before Kemet. There's no evidence of that. This was resolved in 1974, where there's no evidence that they were having any influence. There's no linguistic evidence. There's no pottery evidence. There's no cultural evidence, because when we see the basic foundation of Kemet, everything is indigenously African. For example, the greatest law, the single greatest law, is the law of Ma'at. In Ma'at, this great law, divine law, which means truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance. But the greatest of all laws that governs behavior is the Ma'at, and the fundamental symbol is the ostrich feather. And the ostrich is fundamentally an African bird. We don't see some bird or some other kind of image being brought in. It's already there. The ostrich is fundamentally an African bird. So as at the root and foundation of the culture and the greatest of all laws, why would they choose an African bird? Because it's African people that had been interacting with this special bird for countless generations. So we don't see this Sumerian influx. We just see that there are foreigners that are there, and they do cause havoc during the so-called intermediate periods. They do cause confusion and chaos and engage in conflict during these intermediate periods that happen over some periods of time. But we don't see the large-scale invasion, clearly the large-scale invasion, until we have the Hyksos that come in around 15th or 16th dynasty. So the Hyksos eventually come in, but the greatest group of foreigners that came in and finally overran the area would be the Assyrians, because the Hyksos were defeated and expelled. It would be the Assyrians in the 8th century before the Common Era. And the Assyrians are from current day Iraq. So you have the Assyrians, followed by the Persians. Persia is Persia or Iran. So you got the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and the Arabs. So it's like a series of invaders that come in from the outside. That's when you have a real full-scale invasion and migration. But early on, the people were there, but there's no evidence really of when they came in. They, like I said, when we see the historical record, they're there. Then Narmer fights them, subdues them, and creates the great first dynasty in the region. But long before that, we have to go south to Kush. And by the way, Kush, the homeland and heartland of Kush was in current day Sudan. That's where Kush was located. It's not limited to that because it was in the vast area of Sudan, Egypt, South Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and Kush was across the Red Sea in Yemen and Saudi Arabia. All this vast area. However, the heartland of Kush, the area where the kings ruled from, was in current day Sudan. That's why we have twice as many pyramids in Sudan as there is in Egypt or Kemet, and all kind of other mighty monuments. And that's why on the cover of my book, The History of African Civilizations, I couldn't do any better honor than to have on the cover the greatest of all of the Kushite builders himself, and that is the great Taharqa. He's the single greatest builder in the history of Kush.
Yeah, that's one of Dr. Rashidi's favorite kings.
Question though, Professor. Yeah, when you talked about these invasions and you talked about these migrations, and there's information out there, and I think it's not enough information out there to talk about that the fleeing and the migration. When these invaders happen to the west, sub-Saharan to the west, to Mali and to Nigeria and Ghana. Have you run across any research or information that kind of speaks to that migration, that fleeing, and the information becoming underground and moving out to the west coast of Africa?
Yeah, that's very important because Africans were not stable. I mean, they weren't stuck in one place. So they certainly migrated because of trade. They migrated because of changing weather and environmental patterns. So we have a lot of migration. And even the Sahara was a wet pluvial environment before it became a desert. And Africans migrated to the Nile Valley from the Sahara and to the east, and they also migrated to the west. But there's been a lot of research on the connection between the Nile Valley, Kemet, for example, and West African culture, tradition, even the names.
Mm-hmm,
and
right.
Diab was one of many that started to focus on that, and it's a definitive connection between East and West Africa. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but there's a lot of work that has already been done in terms of the material culture and the language connection as well. So West Africa is definitely in the house when we're connecting it to the east.
All right. We are out of time. The professor has reminded us that he has another broadcast that he needs to get to. So we're going to kind of pivot and end the broadcast, but invite you to come to Cleveland on the 16th of March. We'll post details about that event so that you can get tuned in and you can make that trip to Cleveland, because I can guarantee you it will be worth your while. Professor Ampim, thank you for joining us on 360 Info Network today.
Thank you, Brother Vince. I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to holding it down in Cleveland on the 16th. So I hope to see the folks that's tuning in as well. So thank you, brothers, for the work.
All right. Hotep, my brother.
Hotep.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right. Peace.
Peace.